Now the third class in Hobby Azon is all about creating hobby projects. And this is really about carrying out the projects yourself and then essentially recording your results from it and publishing that information to your website to help out other people that are going through that same type of project. We're not actually going to be starting on creating the website quite yet though. For this portion of the class, we're actually just going to be focusing on writing the content and preparing any other material like images or videos that might be going along with this text content. So this kind of helps you to build up a few pages worth of content at least that you will be ready to publish on your site essentially as soon as you get the software set up and get everything running. So with that said, the entire point of this class is all about planning and then creating the content for these hobby projects. There are a number of things that are worth discussing about this though, depending on what kind of industry or what your hobby is really about. You might be able to consider different kinds of things as being these projects that I'm referring to in this class. For the website that I'm building, my hobby website, my projects are in most cases going to be kind of construction projects where I have put together various materials in a certain way to create an environment that is suitable for growing the carnivorous plants that I grow. Some of these projects are super simple, such as simply mixing soil that these plants can grow in. Other projects can be really complicated, such as creating a completely enclosed environment that controls both temperature and humidity levels to grow these plants. So I kind of have a wide range of these projects that I can do for my particular hobby. But with your hobby, if there's no building of anything involved, you might be wondering, what do I do for this particular part of the training? There are actually a lot of other things that you can essentially substitute for something like a construction project for this type of strategy. Something like an activity or pretty much any kind of a general tutorial where you're going to be teaching something to your audience relating to your hobby, and there's basically a series of steps that they have to go through in order to be able to learn or do whatever it is that you're teaching them to do. And a lot of times those tutorials, those step-by-step guides that you give them will incorporate the use of products that you might be buying off of Amazon. You might be buying them from local retail stores. Ultimately though, anything that relates to that, anything that you can teach people about your hobby that can be broken down into a series of steps, and especially when products are used along with that particular project, that's something that you can consider a project and use with this particular tactic. So what you want to do to start out with is to simply start compiling a list of these potential hobby projects. There are really a number of ways that you can go about doing this, and I'm going to kind of talk to you about a number of these things here, just to give you an idea of how to come up with this list. If you're not sure of what kind of projects to be putting on this list, this should also give you some ways to go about getting some ideas for that. So the easiest place to start, if you are actually actively engaged in this hobby, is just simply look at the things that you do for the hobby. For my plant growing, I have things that I was talking to you about before, mixing up soil, setting up special growing environments for these plants. There's really a wide variety of different projects in between those that I could potentially do too. So I can get started by simply pulling out a notepad file and trying to make a list of all of the different things that I can think about, different projects that I have completed for my hobby. And I can even list the projects that I am thinking about completing or have considered trying to attempt in my hobby, things that I want to do in the future. So I could do the simple stuff, mixing soil, creating a controlled growing environment, creating bog gardens, creating recirculating water bog gardens. I could even get into more complicated stuff that I'm not actually doing currently, but things that I would like to do, like building a customized carnivorous plant greenhouse, for example. Now this is just a pretty small list to get me started here, but you can see the point of this activity. Just try to come up with a list of as many of these different projects, different things that you could teach people for your hobby that you can break down into a series of steps. In addition to all the things that you can come up with though, step back for a minute and think about what your skill level is in that hobby. And even more so, think about what your actual interests are within that hobby. For example, I've been growing carnivorous plants for give or take, I don't know, 10 years or something like that. So I have a pretty extensive amount of knowledge relating to these plants. So I would definitely put myself in maybe not the top skill level. I'm sure there's people with more knowledge than me, but I'd put myself pretty high up in that skill level pyramid essentially. When it comes to my interests within that community, within that particular hobby, I'm not really interested in everything. There are a lot of different kinds of carnivorous plants, and I really only grow a handful of different kinds. I prefer the pitcher plants, but there are a number of other different ones that I don't grow at all. So with that said, I need to think about both my skill level and also my personal interest within this hobby and consider whether I should be gearing my content, these project tutorials, whether they need to be geared towards certain skill levels or certain interests within my hobby. This may also be based upon what your personal knowledge is. What can you really deliver on your website? While I am targeting carnivorous plants with my website, I'm really kind of targeting a handful of different sub-niches that are within the carnivorous plant industry. Certain kinds of plants, all of the different pitcher plants, Sarracenia, Nepenthes, Cephalotus, Heliumphora, those are mainly the pitcher plants, the species that are available out there. And so anything else besides that, I'm not really going to be going after. But then the content that I would personally be a little more inclined to create for those different types of plants that I'm wanting to target, the things that interest me, I would probably be inclined to be doing some of the more advanced stuff. But it's important to consider what your target audience really is. Is my audience really going to consist of a lot of high skill level people within this hobby that are actually going to be able to follow along with the things that I'm teaching them to do, the things that I'm personally doing within the hobby? Or would I be better served by simply coming up with some simple projects, some beginner level tutorials, and having that kind of information available on my website? So with that said, think about these things when you are compiling this list of potential hobby projects. For me personally, I'm only going to go after a certain aspect of carnivorous plants. Within that, within those different types of plants that I am going to target though, I am going to provide beginner information, and I'm going to provide some more advanced or expert level information. So personally, I'm going to try to target a variety of skill levels, but within the interests that I personally have for that hobby. This is going to help me in the long run with attracting a wide variety of different audience members, but it will also keep people focused on the actual areas of that hobby that I'm interested in. So I won't be inclined or forced to try to cover information about stuff that I don't personally do. This also kind of has to do with setting myself up in the future for potential business expansion for this website. In the future, if I decide that I want to start selling these plants to people, turning from being an affiliate essentially into doing e-commerce, but actually selling live plants to people, I would already have a community, a website, an audience base built up for that exact thing that I would be targeting. So whether or not you would ever decide to expand beyond doing affiliate promotions on a website like this or not, it's still at least worth considering, you know, what if my site does get really popular? Would it be worth doing some additional things? Would it be worth investing in some inventory and then trying to actually sell products myself to get a higher portion of the revenue? Now, the next thing that you can do is using keyword phrases and other publicly available information that you may be able to use to gauge whether or not there is an interest in a particular project that you are thinking about targeting. This can be a way that you can verify the interests of the various projects that you are able to come up with, but it can also be a way for you to find new ideas for projects that perhaps you haven't considered up until this point. There are a number of places where you can essentially go to try to track this sort of information down. There is the standard Google Keyword Planner. I'm not going to dive into giving you guys a tutorial on the Keyword Planner. They have made some changes with it recently to the point where they don't even really give you set numbers for each of the various search phrases that you put in. They're giving you more of a range in terms of the traffic volume that search phrases are getting now. And Google ultimately, when you're using the keyword planner, you don't want to completely depend on something like that to plan your entire website. So in a lot of ways, actually find it to be kind of good that Google is downgrading the features of their keyword planner. You can still get into a lot of those features if you're actually running active ads within Google, but unless that is the case, you get these more general ranges of traffic nowadays. With the keyword planner, your primary concern is just to try to figure out whether there is an interest in your general hobby or not. You may be able to detect particular interest within that hobby that have more or less popularity than others. But when it comes to trying to do something like what I'm trying to do here, where you're creating all of these different projects that are going to address really specific needs of the people within the hobby, you really can't find things like keyword information for a large majority of those types of topics, simply because in a lot of cases the search keywords are really long. Google may not dive into a lot of the long tail keyword phrases, and in a lot of other cases there are simply different variations that people search for to try to get to the same type of information. And this basically takes the traffic and it spreads it out amongst those different variations. So you end up with really low traffic data on different phrases, but you might have 10 or 20 different phrases that all refer to the same exact thing. You're never going to find that information on Google Keyword Planner. But if you are taking the hobby into consideration, if you're thinking about who your audience members are, and you research the information that's really important to them, and you publish that kind of information on your website, you will end up getting keyword traffic from it, whether or not you know that there's actually keyword phrases relating to those topics. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can go about trying to find information like that. Forums, Facebook groups, and even YouTube, for example, use these resources and simply look at what is popular. I could go to, for example, a carnivorous plant forum here, and I can try to find what some of the most popular content is going to be on this website. So, for example, I'm going to try to find the most popular sub-forum within this forum. It looks like that's going to be the general discussions forum here. So I can go into general discussions, and then I can sort things by the number of replies, or even sort them by the number of views. And I can just scroll through these different posts, and I can see what has truly generated the most interest within this hobby over the course of time on at least this particular subforum. I can immediately see that things like photography, simply people posting pictures of their plants over and over and over again, turns out to be some of the most popular stuff that is posted on this particular forum. If I keep going a little deeper, I can still find things that are popular. Anything that's getting hundreds of replies, I am at least inclined to consider that it might be potentially a good topic to try to cover. Now, for the most replies here on this particular forum, it may be because of the sub-forum that I'm in. I'm actually seeing a lot of stuff that's not even related to this particular hobby. So I'm likely just simply searching in the wrong sub-forum. I need to go for something that is going to make sure the conversation is going to be centered around this particular hobby. But even from this particular listing, I can still find at least a couple of interesting topics, one of them being RO units. An RO unit is reverse osmosis. That's actually something that's used to purify the water. Carnivorous plants need very pure water to be able to grow, and so a lot of people end up buying these RO units. and they're typically not simple to set up and use. So that's a great situation where I could provide a tutorial on how to use that particular piece of equipment and refer sales on my recommended choice for that particular piece of equipment. So in addition to that, I know here, based on this one particular thread that's had tons of replies and a pretty decent amount of views on it compared to a lot of the other content that's here. This topic is in demand. People are curious about it. People want to know information about it. So you can look at these real life situations, finding the most popular stuff on forums, on Facebook groups, even go to YouTube and just look at the videos that are getting the most views. And then also look at the videos that are getting the most engagement on it. The ones that are getting a lot of thumbs up, for example, or on Facebook, what's getting the most likes, what's getting the most shares and the most attention. Any of those topics that you can find that relate to your hobby are perfect topics that may be able to be used for this type of project tutorial that I'm going to be teaching in this lesson. Now with that said, once you have this list of projects together, the idea is not to try to complete every project on that list or to provide a tutorial for every project that's on that list. Instead, this is really more of a reference guide to use for yourself and for this website going into the future. As you have the time, or even as you are doing these projects yourself within your hobby, that is when you would then take pictures, record videos while you're doing those projects, and then go back through and write up content to teach those various projects to people. That way, you're not really overwhelmed by the prospect of saying, well, I have 10 or 20 tutorials that I need to put together. You just focus on one at a time. For me personally, it's whatever I'm doing within my hobby at the time. I will turn that into a project that I can then put on this website. Obviously, if I had started this up many years ago, I'd have a really long list of project tutorials available on there. Currently, I only have a couple of them, but as I do more in my hobby, in my own personal life, then I simply detail my progress on my website and I share that information then with my audience. So that's really the easiest and also kind of the cheapest way to go about it. A lot of these projects, they're best done when you can show people with pictures or videos how things are done, what the products actually look like, how they're used together. And you don't really want to have to go out and just buy a bunch of stuff just to be making these tutorials. But if you're already doing this stuff for your hobby anyways, then being able to create this content for your website is essentially a side benefit of, already doing what you are normally going to do in your hobby. This is how you take the normal expenses from your hobby and get this website to help pay for that stuff or to maybe even generate a profit for you while you're doing the things that you love to do with your hobby. Now with that said, the next part that I need to talk to you guys about is the media. For most websites, this is going to be pictures and it's going to be videos. There could be some exceptions to that though. Obviously, if your hobby has to do with music, then there's a pretty good chance you might end up having audio files on your website. Or you might just decide to do that audio as part of a video. For example, if you have a site about guitars, you might show yourself playing guitar to teach people how to do various things or play certain songs. So beyond certain exceptions like that, taking pictures of the products that you're buying and using within your hobby, taking pictures of the things that you are doing with those products, and kind of documenting your progress through the hobby, that's really what the media is covering here. And this stuff is really important. Personally, I consider to be media a key to this entire strategy because you get a lot of different benefits from it all across the board. Your audience is going to enjoy this added media. With these project tutorials, for example, having pictures to look at of the things that you're telling people to do, or having a video that they can follow along with for your tutorial, that kind of stuff is priceless to your audience members. Not only that, but this media can actually help to get you additional exposure. Having images on your WordPress site, especially when they are unique images that you've taken and published yourself to where those images don't exist anywhere else, those images can rank in Google image search. They can also help to boost the search ranking of the actual project tutorial page that you are building. You can even take those videos and publish them all on a standalone YouTube channel. And then you have an entire channel that's all about your hobby. And that can build an audience on its own and can also be used to drive traffic back to your website. So again, the media has a wide variety of advantages pretty much no matter which direction you look in. If for some reason though, if there's something really, really important that you want to add to your website, but you just have no way of taking some unique pictures of your own to go along with it, there are certainly other options. You can use pictures off of Amazon of the products as long as you are promoting those products with those images. You can also go out to Google image search and try to find publicly available images that you can legally reuse on your website too. However, you will get the best results from being able to take your own pictures and your own video. You don't have to professionally produce this stuff though. If you have any kind of digital camera, essentially, whether it's on your smartphone or even one of the standalone digital cameras, no matter what level or quality it is, it will be good enough to create this media. It doesn't have to be perfect. So with that said, there are a number of different ways that you can utilize this media when you are creating these hobby projects. One of them is to do simple images or videos, or maybe even both, of the products that you are buying for your hobby. When you get the product in the mail, if you're ordering it off of Amazon yourself, for example, take out your camera, take out your smartphone and set it up to record a video or start shooting some pictures. As you are opening the product, as you are taking it out of its packaging and checking it out for the first time, as you're going through and setting things up with it, this makes for a great opportunity for some really good pictures, especially if it's the kind of product where you'll end up getting it dirty, for example. In my hobby, with being plants and plants growing in dirt, stuff ends up getting pretty messy. So if I don't take a picture of it, essentially as soon as I buy it, before I put that product into use, then I end up with pictures of a lot of, dirty, dingy looking equipment, even if the stuff is only a week old. In addition to that though, it can also still be used for other purposes like what I've mentioned already. Going on a YouTube channel, people actually look for videos of that nature on YouTube. So it can help you to attract additional traffic that is targeted towards your hobby, in addition to adding value to your website for your audience. The products themselves, taking pictures of them is really important. This can either be pictures of the products by themselves, or it can be pictures of you kind of putting the products into use. If you're having to build something out of it, you can kind of document the process of how these products are being used. If you are doing some kind of activity with these products, then you can simply take pictures and or videos of you using them. Going back to the guitar reference I made a little earlier, you buy a new guitar, you buy some new strings, you buy a new piece of hardware for your guitar or something like that, and you're going to make an upgrade to it. Take a video of you doing that action, that project, and then teach people how you did that, and then promote those products that you utilized as an affiliate on Amazon, assuming that that is the best place to buy them. That's something I'll actually be getting to talk about here in just a few minutes or so. Finally here, when you are going through these projects, if you're building something, if you're simply documenting the steps that somebody has to take to complete these things, again, images and videos work great for that. Just show people what the process is. Take as many pictures, as much video as you can. You can always whittle it down later and pick out the best of your images. Or you can cut a couple minute segment out of your video that you ultimately want to show people. But it's really hard to go back and try to reproduce that stuff at a later point in time. There's no better time to do it than when you're actually just getting these products and just putting them into use for yourself for the first time. Then you simply take this media and go back and start building these project pages on your website. So you start teaching that stuff to people, but the media creation really comes first as you are actually doing those projects for yourself. So the next thing I want to talk about here has to do with the products that you're actually going to buy and or use for these different projects in your hobby. Ultimately, on any of these project pages or tutorial pages, whenever you're utilizing a product, you want to have a little materials list section so people know the things that they're going to need to complete that project. This also tells them what your recommendations are for those products, where you buy them especially. I recommend to start out by simply making a list of these various materials that you'll use for a particular project. For example, here I have a materials list for a cooling system that I've created for carnivorous plants. So these are all the materials that I use for it. I have some additional materials that are not really like products necessarily that I'm going to be recommending for people to buy. A lot of them will be standard type of things that people may already have in their home, for example, like duct tape. I'm also going to have a section on tools. Since my project involves building something, I need to tell people, what equipment they're going to need. So you do want to think across the board on this for your entire project. In order for somebody to do that project themselves, what will they need? What products are they going to have to buy? What do they need to scrounge up from around their house? What tools do they need to get together or even go buy if they don't already own them? Once you have this listing of the different product names that you're going to be utilizing for your project, the next step is to figure out where to buy them. Most people already do this type of research for their hobby anyways. If you're going to buy a product or a number of different products to complete a specific project for your hobby, you probably shop around. You do a little bit of research, figure out, can I find this stuff in a local retail store? If so, what's it going to cost? Can I find this stuff online? If so, what's it going to cost me? Where's the better place to buy it? Are there places where it's simply not available? In my hobby, there are a huge majority of products that I need to be able to do my hobby successfully that you can't find in retail stores locally, period. I'm sure they're available in other areas of the country, perhaps. For example, if you live on the coast of California, the climate there is a lot more friendly to carnivorous plants than it is where I live, where we get below freezing winters. If you're in more of a Mediterranean climate though, and that kind of stuff might be more prevalent in local retail stores for you. For me though, I'm not able to buy a lot of what I need in a retail store even if I wanted to. So if something breaks or if I decide today that I want to start a new project, a lot of times I can't. I have to wait. I have to order it online and wait for it to get here just simply because it can't be found locally. But then there are other things that are found locally and it's actually cheaper and or it simply makes a lot more sense to buy these things locally as opposed to buying them on Amazon. One really good example is soil. I need a lot of peat moss and a lot of perlite and a lot of things like sand and bark for the plants that I grow. Sure, I can buy that stuff online. I could try to recommend that people buy those things on Amazon, but it really doesn't make sense to. A lot of times it might even be more expensive getting it on Amazon than it would be to run out to my local Lowe's or Walmart and pick some up. So I want to think about where I personally would buy this stuff, where I would tell my best friend or a close family member to buy this stuff. You're not going to be like, hey, go buy it at Amazon because I want to get a commission, even though it's going to cost you more money. You're going to tell them the best place to go. So that's what you want to do here. You're looking out for the best interests of your audience that is trying to do this hobby, that's trying to learn from you. By telling them that accurate information on where the best place is to truly buy these things, some of your recommendations will point them to a local retail store and some of them will point them to Amazon. That's really the most ideal situation that you can hope for when you point people to two different places. One where you're going to benefit if they buy, but the other one where you're not going to benefit whatsoever. You know, if I tell somebody to go to Lowe's and to buy lumber to build a growing environment for plants, I'm not going to make a commission off of it, but I am going to build trust in the process with my audience members. So then when I tell them that they need some of these other pieces of equipment and the best place to get them is off of Amazon and I direct them to those products, they don't really question that. They build up that trust because I'm looking out for their best interests and not trying to just gain a commission here, even though that is the obvious point of building the entire website. Still though, focus on helping people and the sales will come as a result. So with most of these products here, again, unless it's something kind of general construction related like lumber or duct tape or maybe things that are used in pond construction like pond liner or waterfall foam, things of that nature, that's really the only stuff that I can find and therefore that I recommend buying in a local retail store. So I point people to Lowe's or to Home Depot or to Walmart for that type of stuff. Major chain retailers that pretty much no matter where you live in the country, you should have one of those stores probably within 5 or 10 miles of your home. So people are familiar with it. Everything else though that's on my materials list, it all comes from Amazon. And in fact, I've done a lot of personal research on this stuff, and you actually do get the best price on all those products from Amazon, the ones that I recommend for people to buy there. If there was a better place to get it, I would point them there instead and not try to get a commission off of that sale. With that said, beyond telling people where to buy stuff, if you want to, you can try to create a listing of the costs for all of these products. But I really don't recommend giving them the specific cost. You know, they don't need to know that the fan you just bought cost $13.45 plus tax. Tell them a rough estimate. Look at your project as a whole, and you might be able to say, okay, this project, it might cost you $200 approximately to be able to complete it. To give them a general idea of what the whole project might run them. But that's optional. You don't have to do that. Sometimes telling people prices can actually give them an unrealistic expectation. They might think, okay, I can do this project for $200. They get into it, they start buying or looking up the products to start buying them, and maybe it's going to cost them $300 or $400 instead, possibly because they live in a different area of the country than me. If I recommend for someone to go to Lowe's and buy a product, it might not cost them the same thing that it costs me because their prices can vary depending on where you are throughout the country. Just like it can vary on the amount that you pay for a gallon of gasoline. It can also vary from one state to the next on buying different products in local retail stores, for example. You have different sales tax levels. So you have all these different things that can affect the cost, and ultimately the vast majority of people probably can't do it for the exact same cost that you could. So if you're going to give a cost, give an estimate, don't give an exact number. My final thing here, tools and other materials. I already covered this briefly when I was going through my materials listing. I have a listing of the different products that I'm going to use in my materials list, and then I have the tools that I'm going to use. These are things that, in most cases at least, I would expect for my audience members to already own them. And if for some reason they don't, then I'm still not really trying to get an affiliate sale on these items, even though most of these items being, you know, electrical tools, for example, they probably would deliver pretty decent commissions if I were to try to point people to Amazon to buy them. But that's not really the goal here. That's not the kind of item that I'm trying to push people into buying. And the chances of somebody coming onto one of these things and actually needing, say, a jigsaw and not already owning one and actually wanting to go and buy it off of Amazon through my affiliate link, it's probably not very good odds. So, you know, I'm really more focused on the hobby related products and not these tools, but still, if they're needed for my project, I need to tell people what they are so they can make sure they have these items at their disposal. Now the next step here is called the project outline. Once you get into a specific project, you start doing the work for it, you record all of your media that you're going to be using. The only thing that's really left to do is to write essentially a text article that's going to be the meat of this particular page that you're going to build for this project. Some of these articles might end up being on the small side. They might be 500 words or 1,000 words. Some of them might be essentially book length, where you have a 20,000 word tutorial. My tutorial that I put together, it's something that I really ended up breaking down into a number of different pieces. This is actually the first tutorial that I put together on this particular site. It's my Highland Nepenthes grow chamber. It's not only this one page though, I actually split off two separate parts of it, the cooling system and the automated watering system. They have their own pages, but if I were to combine all of the content on this page and even on those other two pages, essentially the full content for this entire project, it's a pretty hefty amount. It's somewhere in maybe the 30 to 40,000 word neighborhood. With that said though, you don't have to make project tutorials of any given size. It's all about what you're trying to teach people how to do. If you're trying to teach them something that's pretty short and simple, then your project tutorial is probably going to end up pretty short and simple. If you're trying to teach them to build something really complicated from scratch and there's all kinds of minor details that they really need to know to do it successfully, similar to creating this Highland chamber that I'm teaching people to build here, then you might end up with a huge book length amount of content. The point though is the content that you're going to be writing, it all starts with this. It all starts with your project outline. So what you want to do is to break down your project into different pieces and different steps that you can teach people. You can see my ultimate project outline right here. My outline ends up becoming essentially the menu for this entire page. So I can click on any one of these menu items and it drops me down the page to the relevant area on that particular site. So this outline is not only something that will carry forward to your live website, but this is also kind of how you mentally prepare yourself for putting this tutorial together, how you organize all of this information into something that is coherent, that simply will make sense to the audience you're trying to teach. So what I recommend to do is to go through the different items here that I have listed for you and add this into your outline. I start with an introduction. An introduction in a lot of cases will just be a number of paragraphs of text that are talking about my project. What is this project? What do I use it for? Why did I want to do this project myself? And why might other people in the hobby want to consider doing this project and following my guide? This gives people an idea of what to expect. It also helps to give you a place to kind of drop in some initial keyword phrases that you might want to be trying to target on that page. So with that said, your outline, just open up a notepad file and create your outline there. It can be pretty vague in general if you're okay with doing it that way. If you know what you want your introduction to be, just write the word introduction for that portion of your outline. Then when you come back and start writing this article, you fill out the area under introduction and you write that actual introduction. For now though, we're just looking to create this outline that's going to show all the different parts of this particular project tutorial. So beyond the introduction, I have a materials list. This is something that I previously talk to you guys about creating, where you just come up with a list of all the different products and even where you're going to be buying these products from. You'll end up expanding that with perhaps a bit of a description when you're actually writing out your content, just simply to talk about the products that are needed, maybe some general information on the best places to buy them, why you bought them from the places that you bought them from. Things of that nature would go along with your materials list. You can kind of see this type of thing done here. I have my introduction, I have my construction supplies, and then beyond that, I go into other information such as prerequisite knowledge and also the actual steps for my project. Now, the prerequisite knowledge, this could be information that may not be necessary in terms of teaching somebody how to complete your project, but it might be knowledge that somebody in your hobby really needs to make the best use out of what it is that you're teaching them. For example, with my grow chamber here, the design, the whole point of this grow chamber is about controlling temperature and about controlling humidity. Beyond that, though, it's also about having a difference in those two levels depending on whether it's daytime or whether it's nighttime, because you have different conditions outside, whether it's day or whether it's night. So I have some prerequisite knowledge in this particular article about how to achieve these nighttime temperature drops, the conditions that I am actually trying to achieve. And so this information kind of tells people key things about what it is I'm trying to teach them. Things that, they might not ordinarily understand if I didn't take the time to do something like that. In this particular article here, this is actually on my cooling system guide. Under a prerequisite knowledge heading, commercial aquarium water chillers, I'm basically teaching people how to build their own water chiller, but they sell water chillers. So sure, I could have a tutorial and teach somebody how to build one of these water chillers, but there's a pretty good chance that somebody reading it would say, well, they sell water chillers. Why wouldn't I just go and buy one of them? And they might run out and buy one of these water chillers without truly understanding whether or not it's going to work for them for the situation that they want to apply it to. But if I have knowledge about that kind of stuff that's important to what I am trying to teach them, then I'll tell them that knowledge. Commercial aquarium water chillers, something that you can buy for a tropical aquarium in your own house to keep tropical fish or coral reefs or something like that. Those chillers are super, super expensive. To get a halfway decent one that can power even, say, a 100-gallon aquarium, you might spend between $500 and $1,000. But you can actually get an air conditioner with the same cooling power as one of those really expensive chillers for about 120 bucks. And this is at pretty much any Lowe's or Walmart. What I do is take that air conditioner and I turn it into a water chiller that I then use to cool an environment down to temperatures that are actually lower than what the air conditioner is even capable of reaching. Compared with the commercially available water chillers, my option, while it requires a little bit of finagling, it's not that complicated. I'm not a mechanical kind of guy, actually. I don't build stuff. I don't work on cars. I really don't even own a full set of tools. I had to borrow half of the tools that I even used for this particular project, just because I don't own tools. I'm more of a computer guy, obviously. But this information is priceless to somebody before I actually teach them something. There might even be different factors that could vary from one person to the next that could affect my overall project tutorial. If I'm teaching somebody how to build a container that has a controlled environment inside of it, my instructions would obtain different results depending on where you place that container. If I put it out in my garage instead of having it in my laundry room, the temperature would be different inside of that box, simply because the outside temperature that's around it would be changing. And so people need to know stuff like that. They need to know, what temperature do I have this container in? What situation would I recommend it for? What situations would I not recommend it for? Things like that will help people to avoid problems from the get-go when they try to do these projects without really having all the information that they need. Now, obviously, for my carnivorous plant growing, these situations are going to be different from what they will be for your hobby. So just simply consider, in order to do this project successfully that you're trying to teach somebody, what do they need to know beyond the actual tutorial steps of, putting that project together or completing that project? What other knowledge is essential to pulling it off successfully? Pass along that information to them. So when you are putting together your outline here, your prerequisite knowledge, it might be just like the things that I've been talking to you about. I might have a section here on commercial aquarium water chillers. I might have another section on nighttime temperature drops and things of that nature. So this stuff doesn't actually have to do with the project, but it's still important information that people need to know to pull it off successfully. Then, when I get to the actual project steps in my outline, I just want to outline, what does somebody do first? What does somebody do after that? And so on and so forth until my entire project is completed. You can see that same type of thing that I have done here. Step number 1, I cut the wood to size so I have all my pieces ready to go. Step number 2, I assemble the legs and kind of the base of the box that I'm building for this controlled environment. Then I assemble the frame, then I put the water reservoir together, then I insulate the sides, then I waterproof the inside, I seal the entire top and interior, and finally I build the doors and put this whole thing into place. So I've taken my whole project and split it up into these general steps that then I can go into more detail on and teach people, okay, now how do you do this particular step? And then how do you do this step? And so on and so forth. That's how you teach people to do your entire project. So for your outline, you're just wanting to get a clear picture for yourself of, what are you going to teach people? What order are you going to teach it to them in? What information are you going to be sharing with them along the way? So continue on through all the different steps that you're going to need for your own particular project. One of the last things to consider is whether or not you will need step materials. What I mean by that is, if your project is something like this, where you're going to be building something, your overall materials for the entire project, it's going to be a pretty decent sized list. For example, here are all the materials and here are all of the tools that I used to build this entire grow chamber. However, during each step of my construction process, I really only need to use a couple of those pieces of material. Here I have a couple different pieces of wood and some screws and some duct tape that I'm using. So my particular project makes sense to take all of that products, all those different materials that I need, and break it down step by step and say, okay, for step number one, you're going to need these particular items from that overall materials list. So you're just breaking down this materials list step by step. What do people need of that list for step one? What do they need for step two? And so on and so forth. This part is optional though. It will just kind of depend on what you're trying to teach people, whether it makes sense to break down those materials for every individual step or not. If it's something that's pretty self-explanatory, if it's not some kind of construction project like the tutorial that I am doing here, then you may not need to even bother with having those step materials. If you do though, simply incorporate that along with your outline. So I might say step materials here and so on and so forth. I would have one of these then for each of the steps that I do going throughout my outline. Once you have this whole process completed, you'll end up with a complete outline of everything that's needed for your project tutorial. The next step is to simply go through that outline piece by piece and write out all the content for it. What I recommend to do is this outline that you're putting together in a notepad file, make a copy of it so you can keep your original outline, but then you also have another copy of that outline that you can continue working on. Then you take that outline and just make a bunch of space in between each of your items and start writing. Write out your introduction. What is this project going to really be about? What am I going to teach people? Why did I do this? Why would they want to utilize the same type of project? Or why would they want to use that information? Why would they want to do it my way as opposed to perhaps other ways that might exist out there? Whatever is relevant to your project, introduce your project to them in the beginning and just continue on down. You have your materials list here. So I'll have my big list of all the different products and the tools that I'm going to be using. So I'll have a big materials list that I add in. At the beginning, I might talk about how, the majority of the products I purchased off of Amazon, with the exception of kind of the construction items, the lumber and ductwork and things of that nature. And those I kind of found at Lowe's were the best, most convenient place to get them, and also in most cases the cheapest place to get them. As you continue on through this outline and addressing each of the items that you have in it, you simply end up with a completed article when you're all finished. Now, some important stuff to remember here when you're writing out this content. Your main goal here is not to try to sell something to people. Even if that is the goal of your website, even if that is the whole goal of building this hobby website, you're not writing with those intentions. You're not trying to convince people to buy a specific product. So you're not telling people why this product is, you know, so great compared to others and really trying to hype it up with a lot of, you know, strong marketing language. You don't have to worry about that. The point of your content, the point of this tutorial here is to help people. You want it to be useful. Think about if you're talking to a good friend of yours or a family member of yours about your hobby. I could call my brother and say, hey, I just built this grow chamber for my Nepenthes. And I tell him about what I went through to build that chamber. Maybe it's something that he's interested in too. So I tell him, you know, this is going to let me grow these different species of plants. I can control my environment to these various levels. I have X amount of square footage of growing space available in there. These are the different things that I had to use to put it all together and how I put it all together. So, you know, you're looking for kind of a down-to-earth transition of this information from you to your audience. You're not trying to sell them on stuff. You're trying to, if anything, convince them that the project you're trying to teach is something that they can complete. You want to give them the confidence to be able to complete it. Because if they don't feel like they can do it, they're probably never going to try. And if they never try, they're definitely never going to buy any of the products that you are recommending. But if you help them out, if you instill that confidence in them and you give them really great, useful information that's going to help them out in their hobby, chances are they're going to be buying through your affiliate link if they need the products for any given project. That useful content is building a level of trust with your audience. So that is what your primary focus should be on throughout all of these project tutorials. The next thing that's really important to consider is the details. You could build a pretty simple tutorial where you give people vague information. With my grow chamber here, I could say, okay, so you take a bunch of lumber, you attach it all together to make yourself a frame. You line the frame with insulation and with pond tarp. You build yourself a couple of shelves in there. You add in your electrical equipment, cut some holes in the side, and, you know, boom, you're done. Sure, that's a tutorial. Sure, I told people the process that I go through to create it, but could anybody actually use those really vague, brief instructions to recreate what I did? Probably not. Unless you just happen to be really knowledgeable about this kind of stuff already. Personally, I don't build stuff. This is actually one of the first real projects that I've ever done where I actually cut lumber to size and tried to assemble something. It's just not what I typically do. So it really wasn't that difficult for me for this particular project to explain everything in pretty heavy detail because I personally was not that familiar with all the knowledge. I kind of had to learn all this stuff myself to even be able to do this particular project. So that's what you're looking to get across to your audience. You want to give them those in-depth details. I didn't just teach them how to build a wooden frame to start with. You know, I talked about the details, how to make sure your boards aren't warped, how to make your measurements, how to figure out if the measurements of the boards that you bought are even the real measurements. I bought 2-inch by 2-inch boards and they're not actually 2 inches by 2 inches. They're like 1 5/8 inch or something like that. Why? I have no idea, but the information is important. People need to know this kind of stuff if they're trying to follow through with your instructions to do this kind of project themselves. So I go into thorough detail, cutting all the wood, assembling it, putting, support brackets and things like that on it, putting the whole structure together, adding on a water reservoir, adding on insulation, where to cut the holes, how big to cut the holes, um, warning items, things that can make a mess or even possibly cause physical harm if you use them improperly. So, give as much detail as you can possibly provide. It's going to be more useful to your visitors when you can give them more in-depth information. But in addition to that, it's also going to help you out in other ways. It's going to help you out with the search engines. The more content you write, the more likely you are to get a good search ranking for that topic, especially when all that content is centered around that one topic. You're also a lot more likely when you're doing all that writing to end up using different words in your content. If you write a 500-word article about a topic and then you write a 2,000-word article about that same topic, you're going to have a lot more unique words relating to your topic in that larger article. It's just simple math. By you talking about as many different subjects and talking about them in detail, you're going to be using all of these words that normally would not be appearing in your content. So this helps to get you better search rankings. It also helps to rank you on more keyword phrases, potentially all of these different long tail keywords. My page that's about building a grow chamber, there is a ton of content there. It's something like on just that one page, not even including the other parts that are on separate pages. I want to say there's close to 15 or 20,000 words just on that initial page there. It has a strong potential for a lot of long tail keyword rankings just based on all those details that I go into. The whole article is about a grow chamber, but there's a lot of smaller parts to that that people might want to know. The electronics that go into it, the cooling system, the watering system, things of that nature. People might actually search for that stuff and they can find it as long as you're providing, really in-depth information as part of your content. Now also, something that you need to keep in mind when you're going through your outline and adding in your tutorial content is to think about where your media is going to go. All the images, videos, or whatever else you may have besides text content that's going to be going into this page, where will that stuff be located? Exactly what will you be putting on that page of your website? So if you took a bunch of pictures when you're building your project yourself, go back through and look at all those pictures. Decide which ones you do want to show, which ones you don't want to show. Maybe you just took a bunch of different angles of something particular and you just pick the best looking one. Maybe some of them came out fuzzy and you exclude them. Maybe you figure out that, you have a ton of pictures that you're going to be showing people and you just want to whittle it down a little bit. And so you just remove some of the pictures that show things that are not that important to the whole project building process. You get all of these things together and organize them, figure out what you're going to use, and figure out where they're going to go within your content. So you can actually, within your outline, you could make a note, that you're going to have an image here, even reference the particular image that you're going to put there. So when you're going through and building your website, you know exactly where all this stuff is going to be going. Another reason why I think it's useful at this point to go ahead and plan for your media is also for the benefit of your writing. Sometimes you might be staring at your outline, for example, and looking at a certain step in your building project. And maybe you're just not quite sure where to start or what to really say to people, or what to tell them what to do next. The images, the media can be a really great way of guiding you along in that whole process. You sort through all of the images from your project. You get them in order that you want to display them. And so okay, I want to have these 2 or these 3 images in step number 1 of my tutorial. Then you can actually use that as reference when you're doing your writing. So you can look at those pictures that you want to have in that section of your tutorial and just say, okay, what do I need to tell people about those pictures? You can a lot of times even just kind of describe what is happening in the pictures here. For example, in this top section here, I have 2 images, these 2. One checking the wood and simply making sure that it's not warped, and the other one of cutting these boards to size. That's actually pretty much the basis of this entire step. That's what people are going to be doing here. They're cutting their wood to size. So I can tell people, I can just describe these images, describe how you go through this process of making sure the board isn't warped. Then how you go through the process of taking your lumber that you purchased from the store and chopping it down into the various sizes and pieces that you're going to need for your final project. You simply do the same thing for each step throughout your outline. You have your associated images, and they are kind of giving a visual representation of what you are teaching people within that content. So the images end up being next to content that's really talking about and describing that stuff. So people can follow through your tutorial both with the text and also by having a visual guide to refer to, so they can double check with their own work and say, okay, yeah, I'm understanding this correctly, or I'm doing this right. I'm not, messing anything up, and they're confident to complete that step and to proceed on to the next piece. Now, finally, this is something that I've kind of been talking to you about as I've been going along here. That original outline that you created, make a copy of it. I find it best to have a number of different copies of these pages throughout the building process that I really go through. I start out with an outline, then I make a copy of that, and I write my article content. Once I end up loading this up on my live website, I'm going to be adding in some HTML design to simply make things look a little bit better. That point in time, I will actually make another copy of it. So I'll have an outline copy, a rough draft copy, and a final copy with all of my coding included in it as well. So if something should ever happen to my website, I have these hard copies available to me to where I could reproduce this content. It also is helpful with this particular type of site building project, especially if you have pages that end up being anywhere close to the large size that some of my tutorial pages have been growing to. It's simply really hard to edit that amount of content within WordPress. If you load up a 15,000 or 20,000 word article in the WordPress editor, and then you try to click on a spot so you can start typing, you can type sometimes a couple of sentences before WordPress even shows the first character that you've been typing. Or you hit the backspace key to remove a typo, and it takes 10, 15, 20 seconds before WordPress actually shows in the editor what you are doing. It makes it really difficult to work with it, to make additions to it. So I find it best with any articles that are going to be potentially really large that it's good to just work with them in a notepad file or a word processor or something like that. And then you're just transferring this information over to your website when you're ready to. So that way you don't have to actually bother with working inside of WordPress and potentially experiencing all those different delays that I was referring to. So with that said, we get to the classwork checklist here. This checklist simply details everything that I've been talking to you guys about so far in this class. How to go about planning out these hobby projects, coming up with a list of potential projects that you can do, and then essentially gradually over time you work on completing these projects. You select one that you want to work on, you start working on the project, you get all of your products together, you capture your media, get images and videos of whatever it is that you're doing. If you need to, when you're doing the actual project, take some notes for yourself so you have something to refer back to when it comes time to write this tutorial up. If you're good at remembering all the key little details like that, then, by all means, you can skip the note-taking part of it. You then compile a list of the different materials, the different products, and even tools and things like that that you're going to need to utilize for the project. Then you write up your project outline, and finally you use that outline to write up all of your content. Then you just repeat this process as needed for future projects. As you're doing stuff in your own hobby in your personal life, go through these steps. Use it to complete a project that you can then publish to your hobby website. That way you can gradually build up your offerings over time, and you don't really have to worry about completing that entire list or even a certain portion of that list. It's just kind of a future reference guide for your work for this site. This gives you a fairly casual way of creating your content because you don't really have deadlines and things like that that you have to abide by. And it also helps to give your audience members something to follow you for. Every month or couple of months or something like that, you put a new tutorial guide together, you pass that along to your audience, and they get to go check it out. People want to keep following you to see, what you're going to build next, what you're going to try to teach us next. So this is a pretty low-key way of doing it. Obviously, if you want to be attacking this and you want to be adding new projects to your site as often as you possibly can, then, more power to you. If you only want to put a small selection of tutorials, 5, 10, 20 tutorials up on your website over the course of a couple of years, that's quite okay too. Really just kind of depends on what your hobby is, who you're trying to target, and what kind of information those people really need to be able to do the things in the hobby that they want to do. Now in the next class of Hobby Azon, we are actually going to be continuing on talking about one more kind of content that we're going to be creating on this website beyond these project tutorials. Most of the other content that would go on a site would be a lot simpler than this. It could be just general information. It could be pages talking about specific products or things of that nature. But these project tutorials are really kind of the meat of your website, the key useful things that your audience will really latch onto, that they will bookmark, that they will refer other people to. When people in my audience see somebody saying, hey, how do you build a highland grow chamber for Nepenthes, just pretty good chance people direct them to my page on my website, simply because there is not a single other building guide on that particular topic in the entire internet that comes anywhere close to providing the amount of detail that is provided in the tutorial on my website. So um, that's definitely the extensive part of the content creation, are these project tutorials that we've been talking about. We will add in the following class some other supplemental types of content to go along with it. And then in the class after that, we will be putting all this together. We're actually going to build the whole website and set it all up and add all the content to it in one fell swoop. And then we can actually get this thing published and start driving our audience members to it. So in the next couple of classes here, all this will begin to wrap up and come together pretty quickly. For now, I would like to go ahead and open the floor to any questions you may have. If you would like to ask me anything having to do with class number 3 of Hobby Azon, I welcome your questions. Just simply add them into the chat box for me, and I will be happy to answer them as quick as I can. One more thing that may be worth mentioning, just in case anybody is wondering, either now or in the future, for anyone that may not be here in the live class, for example, when you create this content, you're not looking to build, a whole page on a WordPress website quite yet. You're just creating this notepad file with all of your text content, with all of your headlines throughout that text content that help to organize it. You're also getting your media together that's going to go along with this content. And then later we're going to be assembling this stuff into the final website. Part of that assembly process is going to be adding some code and design factors to it. Things like you see here on my page, different headers and menu items and lists that I have, design of images and things like that that end up getting displayed, the main menu that I have on these tutorial pages. All of this stuff will be coming in class number 5 of Hobby Azon, when we will actually be assembling this entire website. So for now, you're just focusing on trying to get at least one tutorial, maybe a couple of tutorials worth of content created that you can be ready to publish on this website when you are setting it all up. So that's kind of your main goal to be working on between now and the next class. Well, I'd like to thank you all again for coming out for the 3rd class of the Hobby Azon series. Just in case you did not notice or catch it, if you would like to go and view the current project tutorials that I have published on my own hobby website, you can find that at EdenCPs, EdenCPS.com. And on the homepage of this website here, basically the only thing that's up and running so far are going to be these guides up at the top. And then essentially a lot of these other items are going to be my future projects that I'm planning on covering on this website. So this will kind of give you an idea of what my plans are and even the current work that I've so far fulfilled. And a lot of this stuff, even goes above and beyond kind of what I've taught you guys to do so far in this class. You can even kind of see the incorporation of the design elements and all the media added into these pages, and even Amazon ads on some of these pages already. So you can kind of see where this process is heading to, just to give you something that you can kind of picture as you're proceeding through your own work. And also to kind of give you some examples of, how this tutorial content, might be written. If you want to see how I've done it, you're certainly welcome to sit down with a bowl of popcorn and try to read through my really long tutorial that I have published over there. Thank you, Laura. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Glad to see a number of familiar faces out here again tonight, as always. I hope you all have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you all out for class number 4. That's going to be hosted 2 weeks from tonight, Tuesday, October the 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a great night, everyone, and I will see you again in 2 weeks.